Hey, buddies, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And if you're new here, thank you so much for giving this episode a chance. And I really hope that you enjoy it. Today, I speak with Harry Tibbetts. He's a retired Indianapolis firefighter and who now spends a lot of his time in retirement even teaching even more. So he teaches a lot of building construction under fire load. Great discussion. We spoke for almost 2 hours today. The first majority of it is going to be him talking about his fire career and some of the fires that he's been on, as well as being when he was a district chief and a battalion chief. So, in the remainder of that time, we talk about building construction, and he brings up examples of fires in the past. And we also dive a little bit deeper into the athletic club fire, things that I didn't even know about. Without further ado, hope you guys enjoy this episode. Well, sir, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk on the show, and for all the listeners and viewers that are going to be watching this episode, to talk about your career and building construction as well. So, sir, go ahead and say hello and then who you are.
Hi, I'm Harry Tibbetts, retired from Indianapolis Fire Department. Glad to be here. I'm just kind of surprised to get asked.
I'm honored to have you on. How many years did you spend on at Indianapolis?
I was 30 and a half. Then after I retired from there, I went to Perry Township to do training. And I was there about 6 months. And then Bill Burkhart from Pike Township, he was the union guy up there, called me up. And I think somebody downtown, the union, told him to call me. And the Pike chief's job came open, and I applied for it, and I was lucky enough to get it. And I did that for 3 years, 5 months, 2 months and 5 days. And then I went to Wayne
Not that
Township.
you were counting, right?
Yeah, well, it was a good experience. And then I went to Wayne Township for 4 years, and I had a total of 38 years before I retired from everything.
I do have a quick question about Pike, since you mentioned Pike. I want to write this one down too. Pike is known for having an extremely in-depth or a high-ranking, physically fit like schedule, or just the whole entire department just being incredibly fit. Was that something that was going on while you were the fire chief there, or was that something that was more recently done?
We had
They have a priority in physical fitness. That's the better question.
Yeah, they were a pretty physically fit bunch. I don't know if they've initiated anything more formal than what we had when I was there. I mainly found that it was a great bunch of guys, and to be honest with you, if people ask me which department I like the best, it's Pike.
Really?
Those guys, yeah. I mean, they were a great bunch of guys. They needed a little spiffing up in terms of maybe just relax rules a little bit. I'll give you an example of that. When I went there, they were training on Christmas Day.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, no, we don't need to do that, guys. But
Like department trainings on Christmas Day?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
If it was your day, and it was Wednesday or whatever.
Yeah.
So we kind of put a stop to that. But basically, it was a great bunch of guys. I had very little discipline problems. In fact, when I went to leave there, the last merit board meeting before I left, I went to thank them and tell them, I was be leaving, and I said, you got a great department, great bunch of people, and I said, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but I've been here over 3 years, and I've never had a disciplinary action come before the merit board. And they kind of went like that, and they said, by golly, you have it. And I said, and we had some discipline problems, but I like to handle those things without necessarily ruining somebody's career. The military, I was in the Air Force, and the military has a term called Article 15, and it's non-judicial punishment. If you make a mistake, do something wrong, rather than court-martial you, you can go in front of the commander, and he'll say, I want you to, whatever he says, cut grass or, whatever it is, and then that'll be the end of it. And so that's kind of the way I handle it. I bring a guy in and talk to him about what happened. Then I'd suggest a punishment, and every one of them said that's fine. And I hate to go into specifics because everybody will know who it is, but basically you don't have to necessarily crush somebody's career because they made a mistake. And that's the way it was up there. I took care of it myself in most cases.
A lot of the times that you would see with a department on handling disciplinary actions, it can be very difficult because right now I'm in a role at my department where I'm the ride-out officer. So I'm not a lieutenant, but I'm not, a black helmet like everybody else. So it's just that a weird position to be in, especially for disciplinary actions, because I don't know, there's, in my eyes, there's not a whole lot of trainings to be out there for like ride-outs on like how to do the job for that. Like there's no, like the guys always say, like my captain always says this, there's no book they hand you with the answers when you become a lieutenant or a captain.
Right.
So with that, it's like, it's kind of difficult to be even a ride out because it's like, I don't even know what it's like being a lieutenant, and I've got to sit here and be in charge of these guys, which you have an idea of how they operate. But for disciplinary actions, I don't ever want to overstep boundaries and disciplinary actions, but I also don't want to be a pushover. So,
right.
Because I was a pushover at times, and guys just take things too far, and that's where it's a weird balance to try to get. It's like having a bowling ball and a feather, and you got to balance it out. That's how I feel about it. All right, so let's talk about your career. So just before that we started this, you told some stories about you being the second person wearing a mask on your department, which I find it like, it's kind of just weird to think about that at all. But just listening to old stories of guys who just never did wear SCBAs back when they first started. Could you tell the story about who was the first, and then how you went about just wearing a mask, and what that, and I wrote down the increase of rescues with wearing a mask, but just a couple of those stories if you could.
Yeah, the first guy was a fellow named Denny Hornacher, God rest his soul. And I noticed on fires that he started showing up with his mask on, coming in with his mask on, and getting into places that nobody else could for a long time, till it got ventilated or, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. And so I started, when I come to work in the morning, I would get up on top of the engine. We had those Maxim open cab engines. You rode on the back step, and I get up on, and the masks were in like a suitcase on top by the booster line. So I'd get up there and get that down, take the mask out, and put it on the hose bed in front of me. And then on the way to the fire, I'd put my coat on, hook my arm over the bar, put the mask on, and when we got to the fire, all I had to do is don the face piece and go in. And as a result of that, there was a lot of times that I could jump through a window, bust a window out, find somebody and get them out. And the first guy was a fellow named Richard Coward. He was 85 years old, and went up over the front porch roof, and in the window, which happened to be a bedroom, it's 2:00 in the morning, and so I'm crawling around in there, have my face piece on, and not bad, not too hot, real smoky, but not too hot. In the meantime, the rest of the engine crew is downstairs putting the fire out, that's the way we operated. And so crawling around in there, and I felt that his leg, and I thought, is that a dog, a doll, And I did a quick scan of him, and it was him. So I picked him up and draped him over the windowsill and crawled out over top of him and laid him down on the front porch roof. And I always tell a story. I feeling for a pulse and looking down at him, do I need to do mouth to mouth? That's what we did in those days. And all of a sudden his eyes opened up real wide, and he had real bad cataracts. His eyes were, he looked like a zombie, and it scared the crap out of me, man. And I'm 22 years old and just, hadn't been on the job very long. Anyway, that was the kind of thing. And had another deal where two little girls, I can only remember one of them's name. Her name was Quandolia Ford. I can't remember the other little girl's name. They were sisters. Same deal, went over the back porch this time, went down, searched the bedroom in the back, the hallway, the bathroom. It's hot and smoky and everything. Get to the front of the house. I find the first little girl under the bed. And I'm taking her back and took her back to the back window again and handed her out. And then I started up. There's still another one, still another. I started up, and I heard a glass broke over to my right. And I looked down, and that little baby was laying on the landing at the stairwell. She made it to the landing to get out, but she didn't get out. So I dashed down the stairs and handed her out the window to the guy that broke the window out, and we got them both out. Same deal. They're laying there on the ground looking around. They weren't crying or anything. They're just like in shock, and they both died too. So
how old do you think they were?
I don't know, probably 6 or 7, and they were pretty close in age, just little girls. And I had a little girl at that time, and that's when it comes home to you, that you hope nothing like that ever happens to her.
With going through stuff like that pretty early on in your career, how did you deal with it?
Alcohol.
Oh. At least you're honest.
Well, the deal is, there was no employees, assistants, none of that stuff around, and I don't know. I can't say that it didn't affect me, but I will say this. And I teach classes on tactics, and I say to the guys, when I do a search, I always do a left-hand search. I'm left-handed. That means I take my left hand, put it on the door, or put it on the wall, and blah, blah, blah. So what if I went completely around a room, searched 100 linear feet, but if I'd have made a right-hand search, I'd have found them within 5 feet? What do you do in that case? Well, you can't eat yourself alive because you went the wrong way. You just tell yourself you did the best you could for them, gave them the best possible chance, and that helped a lot. But I won't say that it hasn't at various times messed with my mind. In fact, give you one more example. I was on Engine 23, and we had a house fire on Harding Street, just north of 16th. And we get there, and people are out in front, and there's not too much smoke in the house, and they're just sort of milling around, the people that live there. And they said, there's a kid in a bedroom. So I had my mask on and went back there to the bedroom, and I could hear him through the door. I can't make the noise that would probably bust your, but it sounded like he was drawing air through a very small airway, and it was making this noise like I don't know, like a horse whinnying or something. I don't know for sure. I went to push the door open, and he was laying up against it, so I had to push harder and finally got him away from the door. And I reached down to get a hold of his arms to drag him out into the hallway, and his skin came off in my hands, and rolled him out in the hallway, put the fire out, went out in front. It was cold weather, and there was snow on the ground, cold but sunny, and the kid was laying there in a snowbank with steam coming off of him. And that messed with my mind pretty good. I almost left suppression and went to work in the shops because I'd had so many of these. But I used the old thing. I gave him the best chance I could, Plus, I couldn't let the old family tradition down. I got 17 members on the fire department, either by marriage or by blood, that are on various fire departments, Indianapolis and Decatur and Wayne. I got a nephew and a great nephew that's on Jacksonville, Florida. My daughter's on IFD. She's a lieutenant. So I think it's a gene defect, frankly, but there's history and tradition in the family.
How strange is that you thought about leaving from operations and going to maintenance, but the pull to keep you there was the fact that everyone in your family was doing this? Did you feel like if they're doing it, I could still keep doing it?
Oh, I got to tell you, my dad was on the job. My first fire was over on Eugene Street. Mm-hmm. It's between 29th and 30th Street. And I got to work early that day, and the captain, we got to run probably about, 7 o'clock maybe in the morning. And we went over there, and the captain handed me the nozzle and said, go right in the front door, go right in the front door. And I did. This is my first fire. And I went in the front door, and as soon as I took a breath, I dropped straight to my knees. Felt like somebody shoved a hot poker down my throat, And the first thing that went through my mind is, how can my dad and my uncles do this job? I ain't cut out for this, Well, the captain comes in, pats me on the butt and says, get on the floor, get down low. And then the 14s went around the back. They hit it from the back, and it was all over with. But I was looking for a little bit of encouragement and some direction. And until he got up there and, had me get down low, and we had no training in those days, on that kind of stuff. So anyway, we had some good firemen in the family. My dad, he retired just about 3 years before I came on. I was in the Air Force when he retired. And so there was a lot of guys still around that worked with him. And I can't tell you how many people said, pound for pound, he was the best fireman they ever knew. He didn't weigh 150 pounds his whole life, but he smoked unfiltered Camel cigarettes. And when he got older, that wasn't strong enough, so they had this pipe tobacco that was put in the cigarettes. What is that? I can't remember what it is, but anyway, he smoked those unfiltered. And good fireman, and he had some demons. He was in World War II, Italy and Africa, Sicily, and developed alcohol problems and ended up taking his own life when he was 44. I was 22, and I kind of resented it because I was 22, and there was times that I could have said, hey, Dad, what should I do here? And he wasn't around. So what I do, I kind of do it in my teaching, but I also do it in my personal life, is I am free at giving people advice and showing them how to do things. My grandsons, I've taught them all how to make noodles. I've taught them all how to wire an outlet. They've all cut sheet metal with I had a file cabinet that I was cutting up to get rid of. So I got my chisel out, my air chisel out, and they each got to cut, that. Taught them all to shoot, took them fishing, all that kind of thing. So I like to do that sort of thing, and that's probably why I like to teach as much as I do. But like I said, some good firemen. My brother is a good fireman. His son is. My daughter's a good fireman.
That's a tough one too, because I'm so used to saying firemen for things, and I'm meeting obviously more and more female firefighters, and I don't want to sit there and be like, it's a female firefighter. It's just, no, you're a fireman too.
Let me tell you something.
It's so difficult. Like, what? I'm not gonna sit here and say what do they prefer, but it's just.
Let me tell you something. We had a recruit class, and they just got sworn in, and we're down headquarters, and they're. I made a mistake of using the term fireman, and one of the young ladies who knew all about the job, because she'd just been sworn in 2 hours ago, so she said, that's firefighter. And I said, how many people here were in the military? Some of them held up their hand. I said, how many Navy people? A couple of them. I said, what do they call a person in the Navy who's like an E1, that's the lowest enlisted grade there is? Seaman. I said, is there any difference between a female and a male person? No. I said, how many of you were in the Air Force? A couple of them. I said, well, they call a person a low rank airman, and that's the way it is. Of course, they probably changed all that now. And anyway, I said, someday somebody might look down at you in your casket and say, she was a pretty good fireman, and that ain't an insult. Mm-hmm. And that's how I handled that.
And the way I've explained it to somebody before, which is that's a great way of handling it as well, is look at like what it talks about in the Bible, like mankind doing it for man. It's not just men, it's men, women, children.
Of course. And
so that's how I've looked at it. And if you want to try to separate yourself, then I will make sure you are separated completely, because I'm not going to, you're part of the group. You are one of the guys. Yeah. Like, I can't treat you any differently. I shouldn't. If I am, then there's a bias there. If I'm treating you differently on just because you want to be considered to be something else, then at that point we don't have much in common. Mm-hmm. Because every person, I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what obviously I want you to believe in God. I want you to be saved by Jesus. Like, that's what I want for people, but I don't care your religion, your race, your background. You're coming here, you're part of my family. You're with me. Like, you're a fireman. Mm-hmm. But I digress on that subject. It's just a way of building camaraderie with people and building a relationship and a family aspect. And that's a big deal in the fire service. And I think a lot of that gets muddled up in these definitions of things. All right. So, excuse me. Have there been any fires in your career? I've asked this question before. I know I asked Steve Dillman this question, that you were in your head, or maybe out loud that you've said it, where you're like, this might be my last fire.
Yeah, there have been a couple. The one that comes to mind is we had a basement fire, and we had a sub with us, and it was myself and him went down the basement, and the lieutenant was at the back door leaning in, shouting encouragement to me. He was a guy named Rad Moore.
Rad Moore?
Yeah, his name
That's
was
cool.
Radford.
That's
and
cool.
He went by Rad. And you talk about mentors. I had some, and he is definitely one of them. And we get down there, and apparently there was a backdraft, and the flame shot across the top, the ceiling of the basement, went up the stairs and blew Rad out onto the sidewalk, and he was laying there on his back when we got up the stairs. Anyway, this kid I was with named Chris Pitts, he was a sub. He says, what do we do now? I said, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm getting the hell out of here. And it was like the Three Stooges pulling each other down, trying to, he'd get up. And anyway, we got out, but that scared me. That was a really bad one. And then probably the other one was a fire I was when I was deputy chief, it was called Metalworking Lubricants, and it was down south of town, south of Morris Street, just off of West Street, and Senate is on Senate Avenue, and the place recycled motor oil. If you go to McQuick, they take your they recycle it and make lubricants for machine shops and stuff. Well, they had some stuff around there, and it was oil, and there was tanks with sulfuric acid in them. They were being heated. They were exploding, and we brought the airport in to help with flammable liquid foam, and Chief Smith arrived. I was running the fire till he got there, and I said, let me take 2 companies back there with a couple of lines, with the foam lines, and I said, we'll let the airport hit it with all their foam, and then we'll go back and finish it off. And that's what we did. And that was scary because there was stuff exploding. Then I had a propane tank farm. It had 2 30,000-gallon horizontal propane tanks, and they were filling tanks that go on like I could call them tow motors, forklifts. Okay, and those things were exploding and shooting around, looked like Beirut, And the funny thing is, on IFD, truck companies are very rarely on hose lines. So I was a deputy chief, and I came from home. It was in the middle of the night, came from home. I get up there, and I'm walking up there, and there is Truck 7, who, excellent bunch of guys, Howard Stahl's on there, and Mark Rapp, God rest his soul.
I've heard that man's name a lot.
They're sitting there on a 3-inch hand line, on the ground, throwing water at those tanks. And I said, what are you truck guys doing on this line? And Mark Rapp looked up at me and said, them engine guys are afraid to come back here. And of course we had a big laugh. So I said to him, we need to move that line about 15 feet to the right. And he says, well, we're supposed to stay away from the ends of those tanks in case they explode. And I said, are you kidding me? If it's 30,000 gallons of propane. I said, if that tank explodes, it'll take a search party 2 weeks to find our dog tags. They got up and moved the line. But, even in the face of that, I mean, you still find here, you might as well, what.
That's the next question I wanted to ask you really quick, if you don't mind, is when you're scared, what pushes you forward to continue your job? And what keeps your head calm? Like, what keeps you level-headed?
Well, sometimes I'm not that calm, but frankly, it's just one step at a time. You keep going. And I teach a class on first in, last out leadership, and there's a slide that I have in there that talks about it was a second lieutenant in Vietnam that said something like, it's just enduring for one more moment. And then once you get through that, you can get through another moment. You can get through another moment. And basically that's the quicker we get this over with, the quicker, the safer it'll be. So that's all. I just, so far it's worked out. I mean, I'm safe relatively anyway.
Have you had, now if this is too personal, have you had any cancer scares or anything? Obviously you wore a mask. You were pretty early on wearing a mask.
No cancer, but
praise God for that.
Yeah. I had to have my voice is a little husky, and that's normal for me now. It's age related. That's what they tell you. Everything is age related. I'm sick of age related. Okay. Course. But anyway, had a MRI or some kind of a test, and the test said that I have emphysema in my lungs, in the top of my lungs, because it caught the top of the lungs. I've never smoked in my life. So what I'm telling, and last week at Pike, I was teaching, and I told those guys, wear that mask even when the fire's over. And I said I did, and I still got, still have that. It's not so bad that I'm, having any problems with it, but it's visible on the X-rays, So no cancer yet. Hopefully not, because I caught on early,
There's a lot of research being done, obviously, with cancer research. I actually I was on the phone with somebody about 2 months ago now, and I sat there and was talking with him. He's like, "Hey, what would you like to talk about on the podcast?" It was somebody possibly coming on, and I was like, "Well, I mean, he's out in the Midwest, so I'm like, cancer with you guys, like, what do you guys do?" And he made the comment, he goes, "Everyone's going to have cancer." I'm like, "What?" Because you look at, there's a huge risk of firemen pre-masks, and up until about 15 years after they were talking about putting masks on trucks, the guy's heavily getting cancer. He's like, now with the absorption rate through the skin, with the Nomexes, and just any area that is exposed,
right,
just with that type of either inhalation or absorption through or ingestion in somehow, it's just your risk just increases. And also with microplastics, and there's all sorts of things too, which it just brought up an interesting thing. It's like, obviously, yeah, wear your mask, it's smart. Clean your gear, that's a big one. Clean your gear, clean your helmets. Guys, don't do it. Like,
we never did that.
We still have guys that just don't clean their helmets, and I get it. It looks really cool. Like, it does look really cool. Having dirty gear looks cool.
Yeah,
but I also want to be around for my grandkids. If I ever have kids, I want to be around. I want to be that old guy that's coming around to the firehouses and be like, "Yeah, I used to do this back 20 years ago." Like, that's what I want to be.
Yeah.
So you made the comment of that saying from that, I'm sorry if I get it wrong, the general or the officer?
Second lieutenant. Lowest officer there is, the lowest ranking leader, in terms of officer. Mm-hmm. And that.
Do you know what his name was?
No, okay. I think it was anonymous.
Okay,
I do use a lot of quotes in that class, and I know who most of them are, but I think that one said anonymous second lieutenant in Vietnam.
Well, enduring just one more moment at a time. Is that?
Yeah, basically.
That is so relatable to just life in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you're going through something hard, just to constantly just keep remembering, just endure this shitty part, and it'll get better at some point.
Yeah,
because that's just it. It just immediately just brought that into my head. Like, that was pretty good.
We had I had a stepson who we lost to brain cancer, and we were in the hospital, and I ran into a lady that I used to work with. And I told her why we were there. She said, "Why are you here?" And I told her, and she said, "Don't worry, Harry. God will never hand you more to deal with than you can handle." And that was a comfort to me through that whole thing. We ended up losing him, but
that's rough.
Yeah,
that's really tough.
It was. Yeah.
I'm starting to read a new book. I was just telling somebody about it. I had to stop. It's called The Rape of Nanking, and that book is I never really used the word atrocities, but the atrocities that happened, oh my God. I'm only 35 minutes into it, and I had to stop. Like, I was getting sick to my stomach. If you, I don't know if you know.
I'm familiar with it.
So, like, 1937 to 1938, this is over 300,000 people were murdered. Yeah. It was by the Japanese army.
Yeah.
They came in, and so I'll explain a little bit, but I'm not going to go into too much detail with it because it literally was making me sick. And I'm only the first chapter in. But Japanese soldiers they took tens of thousands of military-aged men and used them as bayonet practice, shooting practice, decapitation games, just to see who can decapitate the quickest or the most cleanest. They would put their heads on stakes. This happened just in the 30s. they were taking the women and obviously, raping the women. They were, or sexually, I don't know if the word will get removed from if I say rape, but they were R-ing the women. They were making the fathers have sex with their daughters, and then the same for the sons to the mothers, killing babies, like infants, and they're just doing these horrible things. And it was just making me sick to my stomach. And it's like, how can those people endure through that? The ones that survived, they wouldn't talk. They wouldn't have come out and talk about interviews, which is why that whole event is not really well discussed, and the history is not really talked about on it. Mm-hmm. And the lady that wrote this, I think her name's like Iris or something, I don't remember, but it took her forever to get information on it. In Japan, they don't even talk about it. It's banned to talk about it because they don't want to remember it. They never apologized for it. They actually, the officers that were in charge of that were promoted afterwards, and they were held high, powerful positions in the government. But anyways, enough about that horrible atrocity that happened. If you guys are wanting to be really sad and depressed, read that book.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Sad. I'm a kind of a history buff, especially World War II.
Yeah,
and I am familiar with that. Yeah,
it is making me sick. And then they talked about there being pictures with it, like the pictures. I don't want to discuss too much about it because it's just, I don't want people listening if they just don't want to hear it. I don't want to put that on them. But if you're wanting to see some history and see how depravity can go so low, that's one of the things you should look at, because it's just disgusting. Like it made me sick and sad, and I had to go out and do something that made me happy afterwards. But okay, so you talked about earlier, before we recorded, we were discussing about, it was during the podcast, about Candy Ashby coming in, having you teach a class for her battalion. Mm-hmm. And that just kind of popped a question in my head. How can an officer or somebody on the crew gain respect of others and get trust from the crew by actions?
The class that I teach, first in, last out, we talk about that very thing. And one of the things that is in that chapter on that is that it takes years to build trust and moments to destroy it. Okay, I've seen some of your other podcasts last few days when I knew I was coming here.
Thank you.
And it's basically the same thing. Don't ask them to do anything you won't do. I'll give you a good example of that. When I was a battalion chief, I would get out of the buggy on any run that we were on, put on my bunker pants, my coat, my helmet, and don my breathing apparatus. And if I'm standing there doing that in a white shirt, how can a guy with a black helmet not do it? And basically, I started doing that because when I took over that Battalion 13, the first run we had was down on the circle. And guys were going in, they had an axe, they had a can, but they didn't have their breathing apparatus on. And so I said, when we got done with that, I went around to all of them. I said, what are you planning on doing? Coming out again? You need to go in ready to go to work, And it wasn't all of them, but it was some of them. And so we got that straightened out real quick. Your question is, how
so you're doing it to set the example.
Exactly.
Okay.
You don't ask them to do anything you don't. Care for them. Another thing we talk about, care about their personal life. Don't pry, but if they ask you some questions or something, help them out. If they ask you for advice, for example, on how to get promoted, should I get promoted? Am I ready to get promoted? Do you think I should transfer here? Give them the best advice you can give them. Encourage them to become educated. Every day, try to learn something about the job. And you also train them. One of the things that I did when I was in Battalion 13 is I'd come up with these little 1-hour training classes, and I'd have the companies come down. For example, I wanted to make sure that they knew how, in the case of a flammable liquid fire, to use their
What's the foam aerators? And
yeah,
the
yeah,
foam,
Eductor.
inductors, yeah, the inductors and foam aerators.
I'm 76. I have a little memory lapse from time to time.
Hey, it's okay, sir. I still forget a lot of stuff.
So how can I do this? I can't use foam because it's expensive, and plus the runoff, they may not appreciate that. So I went to Gordon Food Service and bought a quart of red food coloring, and I got a 5-gallon bucket, and you put a half a cup of red food coloring in a 5-gallon bucket of water, and it turns blood red. You drop the inductor in there, and it starts pulling up the red food coloring, and it comes out pink at the other end. And the guys know that their inductor works. They know how to do it.
Idea.
Yeah, it come in handy at the metalworking lubricants fire probably 5 years later, because it did. Of course, I had the hazmat guys there that went in with me. Anyway, the bottom line is you get little training classes, make it interesting, something they don't see, all the time. Just be a source of a person that can be approachable. Train them, care about them, work with them. Don't try to act like you're better than them because you have a white helmet or even a red helmet for that matter. Just be nice, not their friend necessarily, because, you mentioned earlier about that. One of the things that's in that class also is a picture that he talks about in the book. You don't have to, you can be friendly, but you don't have to, bend over backwards. I use the term in the class, don't disembowel yourself in front of them, and I'll say, and I had this picture of the world's ugliest dog. And then I switched to that picture. If you want friends, get a dog, And anyway, that's, you got a crew to run. You got a battalion to run. You got a fire department to run. But it doesn't mean you have to be a butthole, It can be
There was a question that I had about when you were a battalion chief. You talked about putting your gear on, your pack on.
Yeah.
There have been some people that I've chatted with about this, and they brought this idea up to me. I just don't know if it's the amount of repetitions that you had as a battalion on fire scenes, but do you think that could have kind of disengaged you from the call, you being out walking around, having guys coming up and talking to you while you're operating in a scene or doing incident command? Do you think that could have taken away from your focus at all?
No, I don't think so, because what I was doing was presenting an image, but that didn't mean that I was donning the face piece and going in on a line. It just meant that they could see, that I was dressing and they better dress. I don't think that took away from
your focus on the call.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because I'd be standing there on the radio,
Why do you think some officers? Why do you think some battalions would rather sit in the vehicle or seclude more of themselves to run a scene versus standing out? Because some have brought the idea up of if they have even the window down, people will come up and start talking to them, and they want to focus on what's going on.
They do sometimes. I can tell you a little story there. This was when I was deputy chief, and I'm in the command bus and sitting there where I always did, and I had the window open, and this TV guy came up, and we were getting with it pretty good. We weren't having much luck with this fire, and he came up and he thought, oh man, the window's open. This is the guy. I'll stick this microphone in his face. And when he got about 3 feet from me, I held my hand out like this and said, not now. And he just turned around. You talk about raining on a guy's parade. But I was able to, in those days there, we had a headset on. I listened to radio, but I kept this ear uncovered. And guys would be sitting in the back, the EMS guys, they'd say, all the victims are removed. And I'd hold my hand up and go like this, means I hear you. No, nothing over the radio. And I didn't even turn around. Another person would say, we've done primary search or whatever, and I'd just go like that and continue listening to the radio. So basically, there's a time on a big major deal where, you need to be sitting in the bus. But for most deals, I felt like I wasn't being distracted to be outside. Now, some other people may disagree with that. I don't know.
Why should firefighters want to get promoted?
Well, in my case, it was riding around behind a guy that was a goof, and I said, "Hell, I can do this. I can be as big a goof as he is." There's 1,000 reasons. Number one, well, you get more money, but that's not your main thing. Yeah, if they didn't pay extra money, I probably still would have wanted to be a chief. Okay, but it's just that you can have more of an influence on the way the fire departments run. And I know when I got promoted to lieutenant and captain and battalion chief and then eventually deputy chief, each time you got more responsibilities. And I like that idea. I always did. I was not the kind of person who didn't want to, take on more responsibilities. That started in the Air Force. In basic training, we had a guy, the way they determine who the squad leaders are in basic training is they say, if you're taller than the guy in front of you, move up. And you keep moving up and you end up with the 4 tallest guys in front, and they're the squad leaders. That's day one. Well, we had this guy that every time we did PT, he'd pass out. Eventually found out that he had a bleeding ulcer and shouldn't have been there. He was anemic,
Wow.
And so they, sent him home, and he probably got to come back later. But anyway, we were running, kid passed out, and if you finished running, you had to run in place till everybody got done. The kid passed out, and the flight chief, the TI, they called him, says to me, "Tibbetts, you think you can lead the first squad?" And of course I said, "Sir, yes, sir." And he said, "Get up here." I was a squad leader from then on. Then you're responsible at 18 years old for 12 guys, and you have to make sure they get all their gear in order and everything. And then when you get to permanent base, I was an aircraft mechanic, and they put you out on the flight line and they bring you 2 or 3 or 4, I think I had 4 guys. And I was getting ready to get discharged and had a year and a half to go. And they bring me these guys, and my job is to train them to take my place when I get discharged. And that's where I really developed my love for showing people how to do things, training them, teaching them. And so that was the beginning of leadership. And I always enjoyed doing that kind of thing, taking on more responsibility. I remember we changed breathing apparatus, and I was a battalion chief at the time, and I told the guy that was the assistant chief, a guy named Bob Zickler, that I would take on the job of training the department on that breathing apparatus.
The components of the apparatus.
Yeah. And I got the 5s.
Excuse me.
I got the 5s on all 3 shifts to buy into it. So we brought the breathing apparatus up there, put some tables up, and we bring companies in. And I wrote a script for the training, and we went through it several times. And one of the, I did it the first few times, and then they took over. I'd say, "This is this part," they'd point to it. "This is this part," they'd point to it. And all those guys were trained on it before they left there. And that was one summer. And then wanted to get them in service by July the 1st July the 1st in the downtown companies. So I had the guys on my shift sneak apparatus down to the shops and installed the new brackets and all that stuff, and we got them in. Nobody asked me to do that, but I just like doing that kind of stuff, and we got all those breathing apparatus installed in time that met the assistant chief's time schedule,
So I wanted to ask you a quick question about some building construction. Obviously, I've heard that you are the go-to guy for building construction.
Been doing it a long time.
Yeah, and you said 25 years.
Yeah,
you've been teaching building construction.
Yeah.
I just want to ask this question, and then we can talk a little bit about the basics of building construction.
Okay.
A buddy of mine asked, "What are some easy ways to be able to read a residential building?" Because obviously, most apartments, it's our bread and butter's residential houses. We're seeing more and more that these houses are being cut up in our area of Greenwood, and they're being cut up and turned into apartments. Other than the obvious reasons, meters and mailboxes, what are some ways that if you're driving around that you can notice that there's a residence that has been turned into an apartment?
Mm-hmm. There's a slide in my 48-hour class which shows a sign on the front of a house, rooms to let. Another way to look at that would be, is there like a side parking lot, a lot of cars in there? If you have a fire in a place like that, you sometimes open the front door and there'll be like a hallway there. Is there a locked room on the left or a locked room on the right? Can you see a couple of doors up on the second floor up the stairs that look like they have locks on them? And as I always tell guys, go out and look around. If you see construction going on, ask them what they're doing. If it looks like a residence, but it's been going on for some time, go ask the people that are doing the work, exactly what they're doing there. Sometimes you meet resistance. I talked about this last week at Pike Township, but if you schmooze them a little bit, usually you can get them to tell you what's going on. I would always suggest going out and looking at buildings. Get out and look them over. And when I do the building construction class, part of the requirements is that at the end of the class, usually the last night or day, depends on when it is, they have to come in with 10 slides of things that we talked about in the class, and then they stand up there and say, this is for that, this is this thing here. And then I'll tell you how long I've been teaching it. When I first started it, they used slides.
On a projector?
Yes, a slide projector. And I never heard of PowerPoint, So then we went into PowerPoint, and guys were bringing, floppy disks, and then we went to CDs, and now it's a thumb drive.
A little USB thumb drive.
Yeah, the first thumb drive, I think it was 1 megabyte, and it cost $99 now. Now they're so cheap that people will give them to you,
and they're a terabyte too. They can hold a lot of information.
So I would say to them after their presentation, if you give me that CD or that thumb drive, can I use your pictures in my class? Yeah. And so nobody's ever said no, because I wouldn't take it if they, said no. And then I just used those to make, I got, like at Pike Township last week, I had over 300 slides. It's just one after another after another. And the deal is, you make the class better by doing that, and at the same time you get them out looking the buildings over, which is what Brannigan recommended. You need to, get out there and look at them. Best 2 times are when the building's being built and when it's undergoing demolition. Now you can see the type of construction that you have in your area, and you're just trying to get people to be aware of it. And I've had probably 100 people say, I can't go in any building now, on fire or not, that I don't think about, that class and, the stuff that we went over. So that's the best advice I can give you. If you see construction going on, go look it over. And then don't keep it a secret. Tell the other 2 shifts, Of course, it's been my experience, the other 2 shifts aren't worth a damn anyway. Just kidding.
Every time. Sir, so tell me about the class that you teach.
Okay, it's based on the original class. Well, let me go back just a little bit further. I went to Battalion 13, and there was a guy there. His name's Chris Pitts, the same kid I was in the basement with when the backdraft occurred. And now he's a lieutenant, and I'm a battalion chief, and he's got these books out in front of him on the kitchen table. And I said, what are these? And he said, well, I'm going to Ivy Tech and get my applied fire science degree. So I looked at him, and I always wondered in the back of my mind if I could, pass college classes. And so I decided to go talk to the guy, and ended up, I got my degree. And the day that I graduated, and he handed me my diploma, he said, would you like to start teaching for us? So I said, I don't know, what do you want me to do? And so that was how I actually got started. Now, this was Brannigan's 3rd edition book. It was the one that I completely outlined it from front to back. It's 620 some pages, and I outlined the whole thing. When I first started doing it, I would draw stuff on the board, and I'm a terrible artist. Finally, I got PowerPoint, put together these PowerPoint presentations and stuff, it's his book, but my pictures for the most part, and the pictures that the students took during the time that we were in the class. And it's just different phases. There's a chapter in there on ordinary construction, wood frame, steel, concrete. Then he talks about alarm systems, sprinkler systems, that kind of thing. And then we just start at the beginning and go through the whole thing. That's a 48-hour class. Well, they put out a 4th edition and a 5th edition. The material's the same with the addition of a few things. But I'm 76 years old. I'm not going to start outlining a new book, Somebody else needs to get in there. I still have my, stuff that I like to do, but I won't be doing any more 48-hour classes.
That sounds just like so much work.
It is.
It's a lot.
Hundreds
That's a lot
of
work.
hours.
So you were talking about earlier, I believe it was before we started recording, you'll spend about 100 hours on something just to present for an hour.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking when you mentioned that, that is so much to put in for something. And if no one shows up for it, that's got to feel like defeat.
It does. But you still present to the people who do show, because one of them might find themselves with some information that you gave them that saves their butt in the event of a fire. I've done classes with 2 or 3 people in them. And I also, when I was with Wayne Township at the end, before I left, I was having classes with 120 people in them. And it don't matter to me. I do 2 people or 120. that big a ham, I guess. I don't know.
That would just be something for me. It's like, I mean, obviously the only thing I can relate to it is like preparing to do a podcast with somebody. There was a guest that I had one time that he's written a few books. So I read one of his books, and it took me a few weeks to read his book because it was just the time. It was just the timing of it was just not the easiest. And I'm like, man, I really hope that I asked some good questions. And by the time it came to do the podcast, I was just like, I've already learned as much as I can about you. I really don't have any questions. You explained it pretty well in your book. And
was that a fire book?
No, it wasn't. Actually, it was a excuse me. It was a book called Combat something. I can't even remember it off the top of my head. But it was a book by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. I had him on my podcast. He's an American author, but what is that book called? I've read a couple books since, so like it's hard for me to remember titles of books. But it was basically about the physiological effects of war on soldiers, and he used it for law enforcement. My brother got me in contact with him, but it's just I always struggle with that. And then if no one watches it, you're like, man, I did all this work for nothing. But I read a book, That's the only thing I could sit there and pretend to be good with. Excuse me. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
So with your class, you talked about it being building construction while under a fire, having fire conditions. So obviously, the biggest thing that I always hear whenever we're doing a walkthrough of a building of a residence, it's check out the gusset plates, check out the trusses. So you're looking at the wood that's, a piece of wood that's pretty well chipped off that they're still using, or they marry up another 2x4 next to it. Other than the obvious, it's not a true 2x4 anymore. Nothing's really true to spec. It's all like a 1/4 inch off. Is it a 1/4 inch that it is?
It's
off?
A 2x4 is 1.5 inches by 3.5.
Okay, yeah. So a 1/2 inch off.
Yeah.
The gusset plates. What research have you seen about gusset plates under fire conditions?
Well, what happens, and when the fire attacks the gusset plate, it heats up, and the teeth on the gusset plate only go into the wood 3/8 of an inch. I got a picture. I just showed it to Pike Township last week. It shows a gusset plate there with a ruler up beside it, and you can see how long the gusset plates are. Okay, they're held in there by tension. And what happens when the gusset plate is heated up is the wood fibers that the gusset plate is embedded into are destroyed by what Brannigan calls pyrolytic decomposition. And I love to say that word. Anyway, it means destroyed by fire. Okay. Then they will just fall out. And once they fall out, the truss that joint is gone, that connection is gone. And in Brannigan's words again, I use his words. When one connection fails, it entitles the whole truss to fail because the loads start getting transmitted onto the other gusset plates. And once one truss fails, it transmits its load to the two on either side of it. There's very little reserve strength. They could fail, and you can have progressive collapse of the entire building because one gusset plate fell off. And that's what I talk about in the class. I'll give you another good example. That we had 2 guys got killed at the athletic club fire. I think it was 31 years ago, last month. And what happened to them was there was a fire in the ceiling above their heads, and they didn't know it. And the ceiling was concrete, reinforced concrete, but they had glued combustible tiles to the bottom of that concrete floor slab. Now you got glue, and the tiles are combustible. They're made of sugarcane stalks.
Oh my gosh.
The fire gets up in that area, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There was a suspended ceiling under it that they had put in there, for insulation purposes and so forth. And when the aluminum wires holding that suspended ceiling melted and dropped the ceiling, that a flashover occurred, and our guys didn't have a chance. And he talks about that, and here's the kicker. That happened on the A shift. One of the guys that got killed worked at the station I was at, and I realized that if that had happened 24 hours sooner, would have been my guys. Probably the same result. The division chief had all the companies in town come through there to see what had happened. He scheduled them, and we all went through there. And you could see what happened, what caused it, and so forth. And then we had to do we had 3 weeks. They picked some people on our department to look into it. They called it the review panel. And I was on it, and I had to go talk to people that were in there that almost didn't get out. We could have lost 2 more real easy. And I was so glad almost every day. I think I'm glad that didn't happen 24 hours sooner. And that's when I started making plans. We had the promotion process that I put together for Indianapolis required that they take 3 college classes. It ran for a couple years. A tactics class, which I didn't teach, a management class, which I did, and building construction. Those guys had to take all 3 of those 16-week classes to even go for promotion. And you talk about taking on more responsibility. That's example right there. I think that our fire department, you had to take it. And if you didn't take it, you couldn't get promoted. So therefore, if you got promoted, you had taken it, and that makes you smarter and safer. Okay, that's exactly the idea behind it. I don't know I know they're still doing that. Chief Malone, I talked to him some time back, and I was going to do that class for IFD, but we couldn't work out the details with Vincennes University, and it didn't come to be. But I would have done it again. So anyway, those guys that got promoted, and that was the last thing I did for the Indianapolis Fire Department. I went up to the consultant's office, picked up the promotion list, and gave them to Chief Smith on a Friday afternoon, April 28th, 1999, my birthday. And I handed in the keys to my car, and that was it.
I've got a question about the promotional process and education. Obviously, I never went to college. I have no desire to go to college. I have no desire to get further education. Instead, I just do stuff like this or read books. Please enlighten me on, other than just going to college. Obviously, you might be smarter on it. But I also know a lot of officers who went to college who are not smarter at all, but they have that education, and then that gives them the edge on it. Does someone have to have education to be a good officer?
Yeah, I don't know. I've had plenty of good officers that didn't, but I will say this: it depends on what your education is in. If you're if you took bait casting and basket weaving in college, and then you're not going to be a very good officer. On the other hand, if you have a 16-week course in building construction and management and tactics, you're going to be better at putting out fires. They talk about the fact that does a guy have 30 years of experience or 1 year 30 times in a row? That I think that you can always learn. You don't have, doesn't, maybe you can learn from reading books on your own, and that's where the promotion process comes in. You have books to study. And that's how all the promotion processes I went through, that's what we did. They told us the names of the books, and then you study them and take a test that was written on those books. My approach was a little different. You come in and listen to me talk about building construction for 48 hours. Then you take a test to pass that course, and then you take another test based on the material we covered for promotion. Okay, so I think we need education, but it needs to be in the right areas. It needs to be in the areas that we're dealing with,
That's where I'm getting at with this. That's 100%. We do need to be smarter. We do need to be further educating ourselves on our careers. I think a lot of guys, and myself included, get a little worried and scared when someone says, you need college credit hours. It's like, oh, there's a reason why I'm a fireman, because I don't want to go to college. You see where I'm getting at here?
Yeah.
So for me, it's always been like, that's kind of scary when someone says, because my officer even mentioned it as well. And he's like, you kind of should go through, or I believe he said something along the lines of, thinking about for our promotional process, having a 2-year degree or having extended education on it. I can understand why we would do it. But on the other end, it's like, yeah, but I don't want to go to college just so I could be an officer. I think that I could do a pretty fair job by self-education and proving myself to be a good officer. So I'm on both sides of the fence on that one. It's a really tough one because I do believe there's a lot of guys that waste their time on shift with things that don't pertain to our job. I get doing, like, if you run a business, I understand, hey, spend a couple hours out of your day working on that if you really have to, but also do something for your department,
right.
Do something for yourself, for the firefighting world on duty for
right.
a little bit. That's I believe in the fair balance of it all, like a Thanos, how all things should be perfectly balanced, getting rid of half the world's population. I don't agree with that, but so I've heard I've heard a few stories from the athletic club fire. Other than it happening, 24 hours prior on your shift that was taken away from it. What have been some other tactics that you took away from that?
Well, the guys went up there and tried to take a 1 3/4 line off of the house standpipe, but the threads were incompatible. The threads on the standpipe had pipe threads, and of course we use national standard threads on our hoses. Wow. What they did was they tried to, the fire's burning, we got to do something. Cross-threaded onto the pipe, and as soon as they opened up the line, it blew apart. Mm-hmm. And I say they lost their water in more than one way.
Oh yeah,
and there's nothing funny about it, but that's the truth. Another thing, there was a door between the dining room and the bar, and somebody John Wayne the door and blew it off, kicked it right off of its hinges. They ended up having to hold that door up against the top of the door to keep the fire cup from coming out from under the door. Just things like that. One of the guys missed a door. If he'd found that door, he could have got out, and he didn't. One of the guys that got killed. Just, I won't say complacency. They just they just got caught not doing some of the things they should have done. Then there was other people that were heroic at that fire when Mike Spaulding ended up in the dining room. It had a tall banquet ceilings in it. He wouldn't have made it if he'd have been out in the hallway with the 8-foot ceilings. And the guys went up to get him, and nobody told them that everything had fallen apart. They went up a ladder and went in and found him and got him out. And when we had the review panel, we had them come in and talk to him, and they were upset. We could tell they were they didn't know what was going on with this review panel thing, and they given short answers and snappy, and So finally, I said, "Guys, what? Why the attitude? What's wrong? What's the deal?" And they said, "Well, we heard you guys are looking for somebody to hang, and we went up there without being told to." And I said, "You saved Mike Spaulding's life."
Yeah, you can say whatever you'd like right now. Yeah.
And I said, "Please." One of them guys committed suicide. In fact, 2 guys that were on that fire that I know of committed suicide.
I never knew any of that.
Yeah. I do a...
Sorry, she's getting excited with her bone.
Yeah. So...
We're good. I had no idea about those guys that committed suicide.
Yeah. And I trained one of them, and Navy veteran. Anyway, the thing that I did with Pike, the first hour of that class is the athletic club fire. I have video, drawings of the floor, and because I was on that review panel, we would go. There was one of the women that was on the class, and compare it, or not on the class, on the fire. She only wanted myself and another guy to interview her. Joe Olafson was his name. So we went to their apartment. She was married to a fireman. And she laid down on the floor and pulled her face piece off because she ran out of air. And if she hadn't been, the Fives came up a stairway, opened the door, and she was right there. And she says, I never will forget how she put it. She said, "They pulled me right through the door. And as soon as that door closed, she was safe because she was in a exit stairwell." So I do that the first hour of that class that I did with Pike. Well, I did that last year with the 3-hour class. So this year I did the Mary Pang fire in Seattle, Washington in 1995. And that's the one that took me a month, 100 hours to put together to present for 1 hour. Anyway.
Well, teach me about that fire.
That fire was set by the owner's son. That was a Chinese not seafood, but Chinese food place. And it had started out as a 60 by 60 foot building, and there was 2 60 by 60 foot additions placed on it. They added a second floor to 2 sections of it. Then Seattle raised the street level 20 feet.
Whoa.
And it's amazing. It's this thing called the Denny Regrade Project. It's fascinating to me. Of course, that's because I'm a building construction goof. And so they
if you could turn your seat just a little bit more this way. There we go. Perfect. Oh, I can see your face.
Okay.
Wonderful.
I'm the shy type.
You're good. Pull that mic just a little bit closer to you.
They went in the front of the building there was a little smoke in there, and it was kind of a little bit of heat. But the companies that came in from the backside saw these huge flames on the west wall of the center section, and they decided that they would go in from the opposite side of where those flames were and drive the fire out of the building. Well, the fire was coming from the basement underneath them and burning through the wall on the second floor. And it's hard. I mean, I use all these drawings and stuff. Bottom line is they had this raging fire underneath them. The owner's son was named Martin Pang, and he set the fire, and he used racing fuel. He was a race car driver, and there was all kinds of stuff down there in this storeroom, and it's just raging. Well, one of the walls had like 6x6 posts and 12x12s and 3x10 floor joists, huge heavy timber construction. But there was one pony wall that held up the ends of the floor joist that was 2x4 construction.
And that was a load-bearing wall?
It was. And what happened was that wall burned through and dropped the floor joist. See, it's hard. I mean, if I did the class, it'd take an hour and I could explain it. Yeah. But the bottom line is, those guys were in there, and there was 4 guys in the back. 2 of them went down with the floor. The other 2 were in a lunchroom. They had just stepped into that lunchroom. Now we got all these flames coming up out of the basement, hitting the ceiling on this first floor. Everything burst into flames. Those guys would have burned up too, except there was a hole burned in this room, this lunchroom, from the outside, from the fire that they originally saw. Now, I'm not going to fault those guys. They didn't know what they had. Anyway, they dived through that hole and got out. I'm not going to fault them, but what did Mike Pruitt say? Put some water on it. Things will get better real quick. I would have hit that from the outside. It was a huge fire. They could see that. Bottom line, I'm not faulting them, but John Norman talks about if you're having trouble with the fire, making headway, there's only 3 things you can do: increase your water supply, increase ventilation, or change tactics. That would have been a perfect time for those guys to say, back the guys out of the upstairs. We're going to hit it from the outside. And it went on. The problem was it collapsed within a half an hour of the time those guys got there. They didn't really have a chance. The other guy was a lieutenant on another line, and he had a guy with him. He went in. The lieutenant went into the basement. The other guy got out. There was 4 guys on the third line that was in there. When the floor collapsed, they were okay for a second or 2, and they decided to follow their line out. They were going in single file, and the guy that was in front fell into the basement. He didn't make it out. The other 3 got out. Everybody was burned to varying degrees. Took them. They decided to put the fire out before they tried to get in there to find them. Too much fire, too much flame, too much heat. So they brought them out, put the fire out. Had to tear part of the building down before they could start to retrieve them. They found 2 of them the first day, 1 the second day, and took 3 days to find the 4th guy. Yeah. So then you have Brackenridge, Pennsylvania, same thing. Pittston, Pennsylvania, same thing. Fires raging underneath them, covered by concrete. Oh, I know the other one, 23rd Street fire in New York City. In 1966, 12 guys fell in the basement. And so it happens. And that's why you tell them, hopefully they'll, if you got lazy smoke, some heat, but you see huge flames on the outside of the building, there's a fire somewhere in there, and it's probably not where you're at. It's check underneath there.
Yeah.
So, it breaks your heart. And the thing about it is that report, here's why it takes so long. It was a 60-page report. So I had to go through there and pick out the stuff that's important about building construction and that type of thing, and decide what to use. And it takes forever. It took me probably 2 weeks just to decide on how to do it, what kind of a presentation I wanted to do. Once that became clear, things started to move along pretty fast. But hell, I changed that PowerPoint presentation the day before I presented. I mean, and if I do that again, I'll probably make another change in it. It's never ending. It's never ending.
When we talked about earlier, when you mentioned guys not putting water on the fire right in the beginning, I remember being a brand new guy at my department, and guys would make the comment of, I like to get inside and feel what I'm about to get. I like to feel the heat before I start, or find the source and then start hitting it with water. I like getting a little bit of warmth coming from that fire, then I'll start hitting it. And then here comes Steve Dillman from IFD coming out of retirement to come back part-time at Greenwood. And he's like, what are you talking about? Just put water on the fire as soon as you see it.
That's it.
Here's a guy with experience saying that's what he's been doing since, he's, a younger fireman. Back in the day, he had the busiest houses. And he's like, just put water on if you're standing outside, who's to say it's harming you or the people inside? Just open that line up.
Exactly.
And make that environment better for whoever's inside.
Exactly.
Or about you or about to go inside.
Yeah, exactly. I
think it's a pride thing.
It's a dumb thing.
It's definitely, honestly, it makes it seem like it's like, how immature are we? Like, this is I think of it as like a business, right? If I'm sitting there thinking it's not a great way to think about a lot of stuff, but if you think about it like a business, you're like, what's the best way I can get? I have to give something, the best product with the best price, right? Mm-hmm. Best product meaning is I got to put that fire out as fast as I can.
Right.
Now, how good the product is coming outside, but you still have, your job is to put that fire out. If I'm taking my time getting inside just to open the lineup to make the environment better on the inside, or I can just quickly open the lineup if I'm standing outside just for 30 seconds waiting on my officer. Either if you got water or not, just open that lineup real quick, fight a little bit of that fire on the exterior, or even aim inside while you're waiting, or just step inside the door and start hitting it before you advance on through. What you're doing is you're cooling the environment down. If there is somebody inside, like you mentioned earlier, about, you could hear sounds of that guy screaming or whatever the sounds that he was making. If there was a line that was placed just before you guys getting there, or if, that could be that one moment for that guy that he gets. Now, they could talk about steaming somebody, they could talk about all they want to, but that could be that moment for that person to know somebody's here. And in their head, they know they're about to get rescued, or at least they're about to be found. And that can give them that peace of mind.
Right. If they're probably gone. In other words, if they could have got out, they would have.
Yeah.
But it's you don't want to hit it from the outside if there's fire crews in there. Correct. You could steam them. I had one. It was down there by where that metalworking lubricants was, and we had Doug Reno was my aide, good fireman, and we pulled up in front of this house, and it was going, and there's a civilian laying in the yard burned, and we got there before any of the engines did, so. Being the chief, I said, Doug, you take care of that. Actually, the Ford's engine got there. Key O'Connor, God rest his soul, was getting ready to go in the house with his line. I said to Doug, I said, you take care of that civilian. I'll go up here and see help Key feed him hose. Well, he goes in, and you come up the front door, then you have to make another 180-degree turn and head right back out towards the street. Really? And I'm sitting, the way the house was laid out, the front bedroom, okay, so I'm feeding him hose, and all of a sudden I hear him scream like a mashed monkey. And he comes out of there, and I'll tell you what went through my mind. I was like, this is great. This will be my chance to show I'm a better fireman than Key. So I crawl in there and get up there. And what had happened was the 19s had an old captain there that was kind of the bane of my existence. And they had hit it from the outside. And the steam came down, and they did it again. They burned Key, and he had to get out. You'll leave, I'll tell you that. And then they did it to me, and it burned my ears. Even now, my ears will still bleed sometimes from from what happened that day. No hood. So I called that captain up. I said, I'm coming down there next day, and you and I are going to talk about hitting fires from the outside while firemen are inside. And I said, I'm going to bring some books to show you. That's just not my opinion. He says, I can hardly wait to see your books. And I said, okay. So we get down there, and I start telling him about it, what happens and so forth. And he says, well, I don't like the way you fight fires. You're going to get somebody hurt. And I peeled my ear up like this, and it was still scabs on it, and I said, well, we know the way you fight fires gets people hurt. I said, let me make this simple for you, Dave. I probably shouldn't have said his name. Leave it in there. God rest his soul, too.
Yeah. That's how we learn. Though.
Yeah.
That's how we learn.
I said, let me just put it to you this way. If you ever do that again, I'm going to lay you off on the spot. And that was, I would have too. You try to reason with him, you try to take the soft approach, and he thinks he knows more than you do, and he doesn't in this case. Maybe some guys do, but not that guy. He once told me we're just getting ready to have a mayoral election, and he said, if this election goes away, I want it to, you'll be working for me. Well, apparently it didn't, because he
never
continued working for me. Anyway.
So what have been some of the experiences in your building construction classes that have really made an impact or solidified certain calls in your career?
Well, I mean, calls on fires?
Yes,
that it?
Yes,
okay.
Sorry. I should explain that.
Just being aware that plan for the best, for the worst, but hope for the best. Being aware that things can go bad really fast. I've been amazed to watch guys that walk underneath stuff that's barely hanging there, you know what I mean? Hundreds of pounds, and walk underneath it, and don't even know that stuff's even up there. I can tell you that what I've always told them is pay attention over your head. Alan Brunacini, he's, we're going back, well, it's my generation, but it's a generation back. He says, very little on the fire ground falls up, and that's a good thing to know. I'll give you an example here. I taught that 48-hour class to the Terre Haute Fire Department. Took me forever. And they had a guy get killed just before I started going there. I think that's one reason that they hired me to go teach the class. This will break your heart. I get there. One guy is sitting there with the book in front of him. He had read the book, and it was the battalion chief that was on the fire where the guy got killed. And I felt so sorry for him, because you get to that part where you're talking about stay out from under stuff, what causes this to collapse and so forth. And the guy, he lived it. I was lucky. I never, knock on wood, never got anybody hurt. We came close a couple times, left some guys in a warehouse far too long, and the roof caved in, but they weren't under it. We did a PIA, I don't know if they still call them post-incident analysis, or as Pike Township called it, pick it apart. First thing I did was I apologized to him for leaving them in there too long. And one of the captains, Bob Eads was his name, he said, "No, it's all right. We want a chance at it." And they do. They want, they do. And I just said to him, I said, "Captain, how long should I leave you in there? Just till the part you're not under collapses or what?" I mean, God bless him. And I was the same way. I still am. I want to give them a chance. They want to get in there. And I should have known better, though. The reason I should have known better was one of the things that I do when I'm watching a fire or I'm running a fire is I watch the lines. They should be moving in until you see steam come up, okay? And if they're not moving in and you don't see steam coming up, it's time to what? Increase your water flow, increase ventilation, or change tactics. If they're stuck, and that happened that day, and it was downtown companies, bunch of good guys, and I left them in too long. But we were lucky.
What is that like, being in that position? The only thing I can think of it is like letting you being dad and letting the kids play until the roughhousing gets too far, and the roughhousing is with the house, and the house is getting pissed and it's about to bite back.
Yeah, that's they're going to hate you when you do it. There's no question about that. But there comes a time when you have to pull the plug. Get them out.
Do you just kind of get that feeling, or just it's obviously reading the house, like what you just talked about, but is it just like an inner battle with you before you ever call the guys out? Because obviously you want to let them do their job.
Yeah.
But do you ever feel like that could be seen as somewhat micromanaging to guys?
No, because it's your job to see to it they don't get hurt. They'll stay in there till the floor collapses and the roof collapses,
That is true.
Yeah.
That is very true. They will.
So that's your job, and the safety officer and all these other safety things that we've put in back, a long time ago, we didn't, 1968, we didn't have all that business. Hell, they'd leave you in there. You'd come out on your own because you're exhausted. There was no rehab. There was no, changing crews out. Oh, I did want to mention this about that Mary Pang fire.
Yes.
One of the things that happened was they were getting no information from the companies inside. There was 4 lines inside the front of the building. They called it the east side. They were getting no information from those guys in there at all. And the guys in the back, a engine company actually opened the back door of that place into the basement, and it was right there. They were on top of it. And they went back. Now listen to this. Tell me if this is incident command. They went back to the guy that was in charge, the division commander, they call him, said, "It's right here. We're right on top of it." And they wanted to hit it. And the guy in charge back there said, "No, the guys are coming in from the east. We don't want to run them out." But he never reported. We're right on top of it. Never reported that to the incident commander. The incident commander said when he arrived from home, he was the operations chief, "I can identify with this." He says, "Is there a basement under here?" And they said, "No." And there was. but the guys, nobody was communicating, giving information. And so a lot of times you know, if you're getting information, I'll give you an example. When we did one day, it was Super Bowl Sunday. We had a big apartment building around 16th in Alabama. I was a battalion chief at the time. And it was during the time I was teaching the classes. And one of the companies found a firewall inside that building, and I had just taught them that might be a good place to make a stand. Maybe you don't have enough water to directly attack the fire, but you can drive it back into the building and make a stand there, cut it off, and not let it continue on. That guy got on the radio and told me that I was the happiest guy on the planet Earth, you know. And he told me that we got a firewall here, we can hold it back, and I got some more lines up there, and then they went on in and put it out. The bottom line is that education, fire-related education, not basket weaving, and the fact that we had just gone through there helped to save half of that building.
Can you remind me real quick, and those listening in case they've forgotten, how long is like a typical fire-rated wall supposed to last?
Are you talking about a firewall?
Firewall, yes.
Firewall,
yes,
according to Brannigan, should contain the fire even without the fire department's help. That's exactly what his book says. Now, that's assuming there's no penetrations in there. That's assuming that if there's a fire door there, that it closes properly. And in the case of Brannigan says that they have done trip tests on fire doors and found that roughly 50% of them do not operate properly in the case of a fire. It's either due to the damage to the door, the wall has cracked, the rails are cracked, or not cracked, but damaged to some degree. And so that, I mean, those are the things that we talk about. I mentioned in the class last week. If you go through a fire door, you got a line with you, block it so that it can't close on your line and cut off your water. Mm-hmm. I always say lay a truck guy down in front of the door. No, I'm starting World War III there, I suppose.
We always talk a lot of trash about our truck guys, or, I mean, we go back and forth with White River. We always are calling them JV, like junior varsity.
Yeah.
And it's a fun way to get guys to talk to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. I started that because I made a Facebook post. My old battalion, he's now retired. I'll talk about it, but I made a post. We had to go do coverage for White River over at Station 51. Parked our engine over there, and I took a picture of our truck in front of their firehouse, and I said, "Don't worry, people of Center Grove, varsity's here." And they were on a fire, so like we weren't the ones on a fire, they were, but it was a fun post. And I had a phone call from my battalion chief, and he was telling me to take the post down. And all in all, you know, I had to take it down, but up until then, there was like 60 likes on it. Over 30 of them were heart signs. Guys from White River and Greenwood were going back and forth. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And that's when that started with JV and varsity and all that. And I think it was actually Brandon Bennett was the one that when he saw them one day, he goes, "It's JV," and that's when I made the public post about it. But that's where it started. So that kind of stuff is just fun camaraderie. Our relationship with them is really good. I mean, I've become better friends with a lot of the guys there just by joking around with them like that. It's great. It's great to have that type of relationship with other departments.
I got a little story about a truck guy. I'm not going to say his name. God rest his soul. They had a fire, and this was before anybody was wearing breathing apparatus, and so this guy's standing there out in front, more or less leaning on an axe, and the battalion chief said, in those days they called them district chiefs. The district chief said, I'm going to say his name, called him by his last name, "Get in there." And the guy looked at the chief and said, "Chief, there's better men than I am coming out of there. I'm not going in there."
That's pretty cool. See, I'd love to be able to get those types of experiences of like on fires and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
Obviously, I blame our public education for like our department's public education on how well they did. Because I remember growing up when I was in elementary school, I grew up in Greenwood. I'm from Cincinnati, but grew up in Greenwood. And I remember the fire department coming and teaching us about firefighters, about fires, and teaching us about safety and fire safety. And they did such a great job with that. It's created a whole new generation of, I think, people who are more intelligent on basic fire knowledge or fire safety. And obviously with, we had a fire marshal who was really, really good, like very impressive, like very forward thinking. His name's Rodney Johnson.
I know Rodney
yeah.
and his wife, Ela. She taught me chemistry at Ivy Tech. Yeah.
Wow. Like Rodney Johnson, I remember like now he had, no voice volume control at all. We'd be at the high school and we're walking down the hallways and he's screaming pretty loud and saying a lot of things in a high school that you probably shouldn't say. Like, not like inappropriate things, but like cuss words and stuff. He's like, "I told that fucker to fix this." And I'm like, "Oh, the doors are open. Like the kids can hear." But
he never struck me as that kind.
It was, but he was never mad about it. He would just, so he was loud. Like,
okay.
In my head, he was just a little loud, but he was never angry. I never saw him get mad, but he was so smart. Like he really impressed me with like how just much information that he had on hand in his head. Just forward thinking on like stuff that he did with FDCs and having a hydrant right next to it. Like he made that a thing in Greenwood and that's why we're so blessed with our, a lot of our FDCs that we had with building construction that's been happening in the more recent years is that they would put a hydrant within 50 feet so that you didn't have to go hunting for a hydrant. And that was one of the things that he implemented in that. But I remember having him but they've done such a great job with the public education side of it that I think that's a big reason why we don't have as many fires anymore. And I mean, there's things that I still remember from those guys. There was one of the guys that was teaching, which was Tom Kite, and I ended up working with him.
I know him too.
Yeah, and Tom Kite, I remember a guy came to our school, and it was, I remembered looking at him, and I was in elementary school, and then he was still working when I got hired full time. When I got hired at that department, and I worked with that guy. And it was really cool because I look back at pictures of when they were going and doing that stuff, and I see guys that I actually worked with that came to my school when I was a little kid. So that was really cool for me. But yeah, they did too good of a job. They need to stop doing that. They need to get rid of that whole program. That way we can go back to doing fires and stuff. So with your guys' programming, not programming, but with your guys' your class that you put on, has there been anybody in that class that has brought up fires that they've been on that they saw a potential of it going completely sideways?
Yeah, I can't think of any examples right now, but I can tell you that many of them have said, "We had this, and we remember, I remembered what you said and what Brannigan said," because I'm just saying what Brannigan said. And we did this, and it came out all right. And if we hadn't, it wouldn't. And so there's no, the thing about it is when I give an example, I got a slide to show now instead of drawing it on a board. And maybe 2 or 3 slides, maybe a picture of a building that collapsed due to high winds while it was under construction, for example. That's not uncommon at all, And usually what's happened there is one of the students has brought that picture in, and I've got the best one of a dozen of them that different people took, But yeah, it's always that's what the book's about, And there's all kinds of good information in there. Like I said, I think it's 626 pages or something like that, and We start at the beginning, go to the end. Well, I ain't going to do it anymore, but
So before we've been going for about 2 hours now, and before that we get finished up, I want to know who have been some of the mentors and people who have impacted your fire career and in your life personally.
fire career. Well, let me start with school. Went to Washington High School, or as we used to say, Washington.
I caught that earlier when you said Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
I love hearing that side. My grandparents, they all passed away, Scott, but that's how they talked, and I miss that.
I was looking at those videos, and at least two other people said, "I'm nothing but a hillbilly." Well, I'm a hillbilly, okay. So that's three of them that have said that. Anyway, grade school. Mr. Stumpf that I told you about earlier. He was a social studies and history teacher, and that's probably where I acquired my love of history. World War II veteran. Mr. Keith had a bullet hole in his arm. The Japanese shot him in the arm. Most of my teachers were either World War II veterans. We had some of these old maid school teachers that wore the orthopedic shoes and the black hose and stuff, and it was public school. Mr. Keith, Mr. Martin, World War II guy, he's probably the first person that ever got me involved in teaching. He had 4 grade levels in his class at School 48. And the only way he could do it was have some of his students teach the others. He asked me to teach geography. So I had, 8 or 10 kids over there, and we were going through the map of the world and all this stuff. And I liked that, Mm-hmm. So then in high school, Frank Luzar was a baseball coach. I played baseball. He was an NFL referee. One of the most top-notch people you'd ever want to meet in your life. Big influence on me. Fire department, Radmore that I told you about earlier, he was my lieutenant. I could tell we're getting long here, but
keep going.
Okay.
Take as long as you want. Yeah.
He taught me so much. We would be getting the lines out. I'd get my mask on. He'd go up to the front door and push the door open, and he might go around to the side, and we'd get up there, and he'd say, take it straight in or go around to the side or wherever he wanted. And then I would, and he'd be right there, pat me on the butt, with one hand and the other one on my shoulder. I mean, I never had to worry about him running off. One time we had a fire on the second floor, and we went up there, and he opened the door to the fire room, and I hit it. And I hit it for about 10 or 15 seconds. He said, shut it down, shut it down. And I thought, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, so I did, and he pulled the door shut, and he rolled over on his back and looked me right in the eye and said, let it work. And I said, let it work, let me work, So he, and what happened was all the water that I put in that room vaporized. A couple minutes later, they busted the window out from the outside. We waited another minute or two. We opened the door. The room was as clear as this room is. Excuse me. Okay, yeah. Excuse me, Mike. And there wasn't a teacup full of water any place in the room.
Really?
Yeah. And that taught me, you can steam them. Marion Mitchell. Another lieutenant I had at the 23s saved my life. Fell into a hole did I talk about that?
No, you
earlier?
didn't talk about that.
Fell into a hole in a grocery store. Fire was underneath us. I didn't know it. I fell into that hole, and I couldn't get out because my tank was getting caught on the floor. And I wouldn't have got out if he'd have been not there. And he grabbed me and jerked me out of there and flung me around like a rag doll, Of course, he was right out behind me. He taught me a lot. Keith Smith, this is a fire chief, had the good sense to make me a deputy chief. No, I'm just kidding. he taught me so much about how to treat people, how to fight your battles. Decide, you don't you let some things go. John Gregory, if you stick around anybody that's been on the IFD for any amount of time, you'll hear about him. His grandson is fourth generation IFD. I got a grandson that wants to come on, and he'll be fourth generation if he makes it. And anyway, he taught me a lot. I'll give you a good example. He would, if we'd have a guy get put in jail, usually drunk driving,
Yeah.
I got sent down to Battalion 13. It was right downtown, this mile square. And he called me one Saturday morning. He said, "Come on, we're going over and get so-and-so." I ain't going to say the guy's name. He's in jail. So we go over there. And those guys, I had to do it 2 or 3 times. And those guys that see you, they come running and jump in your arms, and like you were their daddy, And John would, if you asked him for something, he would curse you out and call you a dumb SOB and all this stuff. But then he would let you have what you wanted. He taught me a lot about taking care of your guys and so forth. I mean, most of that comes naturally, but he was, he was really good at it. Keith Smith, I could get back to him. He appreciated it when you did a good job. He was not shy about praising you. I got letters from him for different things that I did, and before and after I got made deputy chief. Well, I know I'm going to forget somebody, but those are, I had some good guys. A lot of my officers were World War II veterans. They figured anything past 1945 was gravy. And, they didn't get too excited about going into an ugly place. And, I think all of that was, made me the person that I am. Like I said, I wish my dad had been around longer. Anyway.
Well, I bet that your dad is very proud of you. I guarantee you he is. If you were to share anything with these younger generation firemen and these guys that are coming up in the fire service, whether they're close to retirement or they just got hired and sworn in, what would you want them to hear from you?
I was born April 28th, 1946. My dad came on the job May the 25th, 1946. So, except for the first month of my life and the 4 years I was in the Air Force, everything that I've put on my back or in my mouth for the last almost 77 years has come from the fire department. Do not badmouth the job. If you don't like it, get off. Learn something every day. Take care of your guys if you're in a leadership position. The job has been really good to me. I think I never badmouthed the fire department. There's been some times when things didn't go too well, but basically, if you don't like it, get off. Take care of the job. Take care of your guys. Appreciate it. Learn something. That's a pretty good list right there, I think.
Sir, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule and coming on and just talking with me. I've really enjoyed it.
I have too, and I have to say, you approach these things with a little trepidation, but you've made it very easy, and I appreciate the opportunity because I've had these stories, and we've laughed at some, we had some bad stuff in here, but it's been really nice, and I appreciate getting the chance to do it.
Well, thank you, sir. I'd love to have you back on again at some point if you wish.
Just give me the date and time.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And there you have it, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did and you think I deserve it, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends, leave a little comment of what you enjoyed most. If you're listening or watching on anything else, especially Spotify, because now on Spotify, you can watch my content. Yes, I know. You're wondering, how is Matt so special, just like Joe Rogan? Well, guys, I'm similar looking to Joe Rogan, except for I'm way bigger than him. Other than that, not a contest. So chill out. If you guys really enjoyed it, just, share it with your friends. I hope that you guys pull stuff away from this. I know that I really enjoy talking to these guys, especially the retired guys that just got all this experience underneath them. These guys are, waning out. They're getting to the age now to where their stories aren't being heard as much because they're not inside of a firehouse. So if you guys know anyone who's got a ton of experience in the fire service or even in the police world or anything at all, just send them my way. I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with them. And again, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a blessed week.